The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor as my mother's cruel laughter echoed through their million-dollar dining room. "Look at our little failure," she sneered, gesturing at my thrift store dress, while my stepfather counted his latest business profits. What they didn't know was that I had just discovered the truth about my inheritance. Money that was rightfully mine, stolen through forged documents and lies spanning 20 years. As I swept up the glass, I smiled quietly. They had no idea their perfect world was about to crumble. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I want to connect with all of you amazing viewers. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing our global community come together. If this opening already has you hooked, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this revenge story is about to get absolutely wild. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when family greed meets karmic justice. My name is Serafina, and I had spent 28 years believing I was the disappointment of the family. Growing up, my mother, Vivian, constantly reminded me that I would never amount to anything, especially compared to my golden stepbrother, Marcus, who joined our family when I was 12, after she married his wealthy father, Robert. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday, delivered with false sweetness that should have been my first warning. "Darling, we simply must celebrate Marcus's latest promotion," Vivian cooed over the phone. "He just made partner at the law firm, and we're having a small family gathering. You should come. It would mean so much." I should have known better. Every family gathering was the same ritual of humiliation, but some naive part of me still hoped for acceptance. I spent my last $50 on a decent dress from the thrift store and took 2 buses to reach their estate in the hills. The moment I walked through those mahogany doors, I knew I had made a mistake. Marcus lounged in his custom suit, swirling expensive whiskey while discussing his latest client acquisition. Robert sat at the head of the table, counting stacks of cash from his construction business like some medieval lord. And Vivian, my own mother, looked at me like I was something unpleasant she had stepped in. "Oh, honey, did you walk here?" she asked with mock concern, eyeing my worn shoes. "I suppose Uber is too expensive on a teacher's salary." The dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture. They discussed their upcoming European vacation, Marcus's new sports car, and their latest real estate acquisition, all while making pointed comments about my studio apartment and secondhand furniture. But the real blow came during dessert. "You know, Serafina," Robert said, dabbing his mouth with a cloth napkin that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, "your father would be so disappointed to see how you turned out." My father. The man who died when I was 8, leaving me with nothing but memories of bedtime stories and piggyback rides. Or so I had always believed. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vivian's eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. "Oh, sweetheart, did you really think your father left you nothing? He had such high hopes for you, set aside quite a substantial inheritance. But of course, that was before we realized how you'd turn out." My blood turned to ice. "What inheritance?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, grinning like a shark who had just smelled blood. "The trust fund, sis. Dad established it before he married Mom, worth about $2 million now with interest. Too bad the conditions required you to graduate college with honors and establish a stable career by 25. Since you barely scraped by with average grades and you're still living paycheck to paycheck at 28, well..." He shrugged. The money reverted to the family estate. I stared at them in shock. This was the first I had ever heard of any inheritance, any trust fund, any conditions. My father had been a simple mechanic. Where would $2 million have come from? I don't understand, I stammered. Nobody ever told me about any trust fund. What conditions? Oh, darling. Vivian sighed dramatically. Surely you remember all those conversations about your father's expectations, the letters from the lawyers, the deadline reminders. But I didn't remember. I didn't remember any of it because it had never happened. I think I need some air. I managed standing on shaky legs. Of course you do, Robert said dismissively, already turning back to his money counting. Marcus, tell me about the Henderson contract. I stumbled outside onto their perfectly manicured patio, my mind reeling. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. My father had been a good man, but he worked with his hands, lived paycheck to paycheck, just like I did now. Where would he have gotten $2 million? That's when I remembered the box. After my father died, Vivian had packed away his belongings, claiming they were too painful to keep around. She told me she had donated everything to charity. But when I was 16 and desperately looking for something, anything to remember him by, I had found a small metal box hidden behind the water heater in the basement. Inside were documents I was too young to understand. Insurance papers, bank statements, something that looked like a will. Vivian had caught me with it and flew into a rage, snatching the box away and screaming about respecting the dead and letting sleeping dogs lie. I had never seen that box again. Now standing in their perfect garden, surrounded by their perfect life built on money that might have been mine, a terrible possibility began to take shape. What if there really had been an inheritance? What if my father, through some insurance payout or unexpected windfall, had tried to provide for my future? What if Vivian had hidden it from me all these years, using my youth and grief to steal what was rightfully mine? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit. Vivian's sudden marriage to Robert just 2 years after my father's death. Their immediate move to this expensive neighborhood. Marcus's private school education. The way they had always treated me like a burden rather than family. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and did something I should have done years ago. I Googled my father's name along with terms like inheritance, trust fund, and estate. What I found made my knees buckle. There, in the archived records of the county courthouse, was a probate filing from 20 years ago. My father, James Mitchell, had indeed left an estate. Not from his mechanic work, but from a life insurance policy and a lawsuit settlement from an accident at his previous job. The total value, $2.3 million, to be held in trust for his minor daughter, Seraphina Mitchell, until she reached the age of 21. But according to the records, the trust had been dissolved 3 years later, when the beneficiary failed to meet the educational and stability requirements outlined in the trust documents. Educational and stability requirements that I had never been told about. Requirements that I could have easily met if I had known they existed. Requirements that I was beginning to suspect might not have been in the original trust at all. Standing there in the darkness of their garden, surrounded by landscaping that my money had probably paid for, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what had happened to my inheritance. And if what I suspected was true, if my own mother and step-family had stolen my father's final gift to me, then they were about to learn that the little failure they had mocked for so many years was capable of much more than they had ever imagined. The war had begun. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent 12 hours at the public library, diving deep into legal databases and public records. What I discovered was worse than theft. It was a systematic, calculated fraud that had robbed me of not just money, but 20 years of opportunity and self-worth. My father's original trust documents told a heartbreaking story. James Mitchell had indeed received a substantial settlement after being injured in an industrial accident 3 months before his death. Knowing his time was limited due to complications from his injuries, he had established a simple trust the money would be given to me when I turned 21, with no conditions except that I be alive and of sound mind. He had wanted to ensure I would have the opportunities he never did. But someone had doctored the documents. I found the smoking gun in a misfiled court document from 19 years ago, an amendment to the trust that had been filed 6 months after my father's death. The amendment added extensive conditions I would need to graduate college with a GPA above 3.5, establish a career earning at least $60,000 annually, and maintain moral standards befitting the family name. All to be determined by the trustee. The trustee was Vivian. The amendment was notarized and bore my signature, the signature of a 9-year-old child who supposedly agreed to these impossible conditions. But I had never signed anything. I had never even been told the trust existed. Armed with copies of the forged documents, I marched into the office of Margaret Thornton, the lawyer who had originally administered my father's estate. She was in her 70s now, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, and when I spread the documents across her desk, her face went white. "Oh my God," she whispered, reaching for her reading glasses. "I remember your father. Such a kind man, so worried about leaving you alone with—" She trailed off, glancing up at me with dawning horror. "With my mother," I finished grimly. Mrs. Thornton examined the documents for what felt like hours, occasionally making soft noises of distress. Finally, she sat back in her chair and fixed me with a steady gaze. "Miss Mitchell, this is forgery. Blatant criminal forgery. Your father never wanted any conditions on this trust except your age of majority. And this signature—" She held up the amendment, shaking her head. "This is not the signature of a 9-year-old child. Someone traced your handwriting from a much more recent sample." My hands were shaking as the full scope of their betrayal sank in. What can I do? First, we file a police report. This is grand theft, fraud, and forgery. Multiple felonies. Second, we petition the court to void the fraudulent dissolution of the trust. With interest over 20 years, your inheritance is now worth approximately $3.8 million. $3.8 million. Money that could have paid for college, for a house, for the life I had always dreamed of, but never thought I could afford. Money that had instead funded Marcus's law degree and my stepfamily's lavish lifestyle, while I struggled to pay rent each month. But Margaret wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to know. When your mother filed that amendment, she also submitted reports claiming you were showing signs of mental instability and substance abuse. She painted a picture of a troubled teenager who was unfit to inherit. It was all lies, wasn't it?" I nodded, barely able to speak. Even at 9 years old, I had been a quiet, well-behaved child. I had never touched drugs or alcohol, never been in trouble at school. But Vivian had systematically destroyed my character in legal documents, creating a false narrative to justify stealing my inheritance. "She didn't just take your money," Margaret said softly. "She tried to take your identity, your reputation. She wanted to ensure that even if the truth came out someday, people would believe you were unworthy of your father's gift." That afternoon, I walked into the police station with Margaret by my side and filed a formal complaint against Vivian Mitchell. Robert Sterling and Marcus Sterling for fraud, forgery, and grand theft. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, listened to our presentation with growing amazement. "How much money are we talking about?" she asked. "The current value of the stolen inheritance is $3.8 million, Margaret replied. "But they've also been using those funds to generate income through investments and business ventures for 20 years. The total value of assets acquired through the fraud could exceed $8 million. Detective Santos whistled low. "This is definitely going to get the district attorney's attention. Have you confronted the perpetrators yet?" "No," I said. "I wanted to have all my evidence in order first." "Smart. We'll need to move carefully. Given the amounts involved and the statute of limitations issues, we'll want to coordinate with the Financial Crimes Unit and probably the FBI. White-collar crime of this magnitude is serious business." As we left the police station, Margaret turned to me with a concerned expression. "Serafina, you need to be prepared for what's coming. When you expose this fraud, your family is going to fight back hard. They've lived off this money for 20 years. They're not going to give it up without a war." But I was ready for war. That evening, I sat in my tiny apartment and began planning my strategy. I couldn't just demand the money back. I needed to expose the full scope of their deception and ensure they faced consequences for what they had done. More than that, I needed to reclaim not just my inheritance, but my dignity and my father's memory. I started with social media research, digging into their business dealings and social connections. What I found was illuminating. Robert's construction company had been struggling before my father's death, but had mysteriously received a massive cash infusion shortly after Vivian gained access to my trust fund. Marcus's law school tuition, their house, purchased their luxury vehicles. Everything traced back to money that should have been mine. But I also found weaknesses. Robert's business had been cutting corners on safety inspections using substandard materials and bribing building inspectors. Marcus had been involved in several questionable legal deals, including representing clients he knew were engaged in money laundering. They had built their empire on my stolen inheritance, but they had also gotten greedy and sloppy. I created detailed files on every aspect of their lives, every business dealing, every asset that could be traced back to my money. I researched their friends, their business partners, their social circle. I was going to expose them completely, not just for the theft, but for the kind of people they really were. The next phase would be the hardest, confronting them with the evidence and watching their perfect world begin to crumble. But first, I needed allies. I couldn't take down a family of criminals by myself. That's when I remembered something Margaret had mentioned. My father had a brother who lived across the country. Uncle David, whom I hadn't seen since the funeral, but who had always seemed uncomfortable around Vivian. Maybe it was time to reach out to the family I had been cut off from all these years. As I drafted an email to Uncle David attaching copies of the evidence I had gathered, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just hope for justice, but hope that maybe somewhere out there I had real family who would stand by me when the truth came out. The little failure they had mocked and dismissed was about to become their worst nightmare. And unlike their theft, my revenge would be completely legal. Uncle David's response came within 6 hours of my email, and it changed everything. Not only did he remember my father's concerns about Vivian, but he had been investigating the trust situation himself for years, blocked at every turn by legal technicalities and Vivian's manipulation of the court records. "Serafina," he wrote, "your father came to me 2 weeks before he died. He was worried that Vivian was already showing signs of greed, asking too many questions about his settlement money. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would watch over you and make sure his money went to your future, not her lifestyle. I tried, sweetheart. I tried for years, but she had legal guardianship and the lawyers told me I had no standing to challenge the trust administration. But David hadn't given up. Over the past 2 decades, he had quietly built a successful private investigation business, and he had used those skills to keep tabs on my stepfamily's activities. What he had uncovered was a goldmine of evidence that complemented what I had already discovered. They're not just thieves, he told me during our first phone call in 20 years, his voice tight with anger. They're career criminals who saw your inheritance as their golden ticket to a life of fraud and corruption. But here's what they don't know. I've been documenting everything waiting for the right moment to strike back. David flew out that weekend, and meeting him felt like finding a missing piece of myself. He had my father's eyes and the same gentle strength that I remembered from childhood. More importantly, he brought with him boxes of evidence that painted a picture of systematic criminal activity spanning 2 decades. Robert's construction company has been involved in bid rigging, tax evasion, and safety violations that have resulted in 3 worker injuries. David explained as we spread documents across my kitchen table. Marcus's law practice specializes in helping wealthy clients hide assets from divorce settlements and tax authorities. And Vivian has been running what amounts to a charity fraud operation, claiming tax deductions for donations to fake organizations that she controls. But the most damning evidence was financial. David had traced the flow of my inheritance money through a complex web of shell companies, fake investments, and fraudulent business expenses. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had used it as seed capital for an entire criminal enterprise. The beautiful thing, David said with a grim smile, is that they've been so confident in their deception that they've kept detailed records of everything. They documented their own crimes because they never thought anyone would be smart enough or motivated enough to connect the dots. Our next ally came from an unexpected source. Detective Santos called to inform me that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had taken an interest in the case, and they wanted to assign a special agent to work with us. Agent Rebecca Chen specialized in complex fraud cases and had a reputation for taking down seemingly untouchable white-collar criminals. Agent Chen was a compact woman in her late 30s with intense dark eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of a laser-focused predator. When we met at the FBI field office, she spread out a diagram that looked like something from a conspiracy movie, a complex web of names, companies, and money transfers that made my head spin. "Your case opened up something much bigger," she explained. "We've been investigating a network of professionals who help wealthy individuals commit financial fraud. Your stepfather's construction company, your stepbrother's law practice, and several other businesses have been working together to launder money, evade taxes, and defraud investors. Your inheritance was just the seed money that allowed them to join this network." The scope of their criminal activities was staggering. Robert's company had been taking advance payments from clients for construction projects, then using that money to fund other ventures while delivering substandard work. Marcus had been helping clients hide assets during divorce proceedings, taking substantial fees while violating legal ethics rules. Together, they had defrauded investors, contractors, and clients out of an estimated $15 million. But here's the key, Agent Chen continued. Because your inheritance was the original source of their capital, every business they've built, every investment they've made, every asset they've acquired can be seized as proceeds from the original theft. We're not just talking about getting your $3.8 million back. We're talking about recovering everything they've built with your stolen money. As our investigation deepened, we uncovered more victims. Martha Hensley was a widow whose late husband had worked for Robert's construction company. When her husband died in an accident caused by Robert's safety violations, the family had been promised a substantial settlement. Instead, Robert had used legal technicalities and Marcus's help to reduce the payout to almost nothing. "They destroyed my family," Martha told us during our interview, tears streaming down her weathered face. "My husband died because Robert Sterling cut corners on safety equipment to save money. Then they used their lawyers to cheat us out of the compensation we deserved. I lost my house, my savings, everything." Jennifer Liu was another victim, a small business owner who had hired Robert's company to build a strip mall. She had paid $200,000 up front, but the construction was so shoddy that the building failed inspection and had to be demolished. When she tried to sue Marcus, Sterling had helped Robert hide assets and declare bankruptcy, leaving Jennifer with nothing. "I thought I was just unlucky," Jennifer said. "I never realized I was dealing with professional criminals until you contacted me." One by one, we built a network of victims, witnesses, and evidence that painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning 20 years. But the most powerful ally came from within their own circle. Patricia Morgan had worked as Robert's bookkeeper for 15 years. She was the one who had maintained the detailed financial records that David had somehow accessed, and she was the one who could testify to the deliberate nature of their crimes. "I knew something was wrong," she admitted during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop across town. Robert would get these large cash deposits that he couldn't explain, and Vivian would come in with instructions about moving money between accounts. They made me create fake invoices, falsify expense reports, and maintain 2 sets of books. I was afraid to quit because they knew I had been complicit, and Marcus made it clear that they would destroy me if I ever talked. But Patricia had kept copies of everything, every fake invoice, every fraudulent expense report, every document that proved their guilt. She had been planning her own escape from their criminal enterprise, and had quietly documented everything as insurance against retaliation. "I want to help you," she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "They've been living like royalty off your father's money while threatening anyone who gets in their way. It's time for them to face consequences." With Patricia's insider testimony, David's investigation agent Chen's resources, and Margaret's legal expertise, we had built an ironclad case. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted them to experience the same humiliation, the same powerlessness, the same crushing betrayal that they had inflicted on me for 20 years. That's when I came up with the plan for the ultimate confrontation. "We're going to give them exactly what they gave me," I told our team during our final planning meeting. "We're going to invite them to dinner, let them think they're in control, and then destroy their world in front of everyone they've been trying to impress." Agent Chen raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a risk. They could flee, destroy evidence, or retaliate against you." "They won't," David said with confidence. "Their arrogance is their weakness. They're so convinced of their own superiority that they can't imagine little Serafina could pose any real threat. They'll come because they won't be able to resist the opportunity to humiliate her one more time." I was counting on exactly that arrogance, because in 1 week I was going to return to their mansion for another family dinner. Only this time I wouldn't be coming alone, and I wouldn't be the one leaving humiliated. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was spring it. The dinner invitation went out on Monday morning, delivered with the same false sweetness as before. "Darling," Vivian cooed over the phone, "we simply must have you over again. Robert closed a major deal this week and we want to celebrate with family. I accepted graciously playing the role of the grateful, desperate daughter one last time. What they didn't know was that FBI agents would be stationed around their property ready to move in when I gave the signal. David would be monitoring from a van down the street, and Agent Chen would be listening through a wire I wore hidden in my jewelry. The plan was perfect, or so I thought. That Wednesday, Patricia Morgan called me in a panic. "Serafina, something's wrong. Robert's been asking weird questions about the financial records, and Marcus has been making calls to people I don't recognize. I think they might suspect something." My blood ran cold, but I tried to stay calm. "What kind of questions?" He wanted to know who had access to the filing cabinets, whether anyone had been asking about old records. And there's something else. I overheard Marcus on the phone talking about cleaning house before the weekend. I immediately called Agent Chen, who assured me that their investigation was secure. "We've been careful. There's no way they could know about our operation." But Patricia's fears proved justified in the worst possible way. Thursday afternoon, I received a call that shattered my world. It was Margaret Thornton, and her voice was shaking with rage and disbelief. "Serafina, I've been served with a restraining order. Marcus Sterling is claiming that you've been harassing his family, making false accusations and threatening violence. The order prevents me from representing you and requires me to turn over all case files to his law firm for review." "That's impossible," I stammered. "On what grounds?" "According to the filing, you've been stalking them, making threatening phone calls and attempting to extort money based on fabricated documents. They're claiming that the trust documents you found are forgeries that you created yourself as part of an elaborate fraud scheme." My legs gave out and I collapsed into my kitchen chair. "But we have proof. We have witnesses. We have..." "The filing includes affidavits from 3 witnesses who claim you've been unstable and delusional since childhood. There's also a psychiatric evaluation from when you were 16 that supposedly documents your history of fabricating stories and making false accusations." I had never had a psychiatric evaluation. I had never made false accusations. But somehow they had created an entirely fictional history that painted me as an unstable fantasist. "There's more," Margaret continued, her voice heavy with sorrow. "The restraining order was signed by Judge Harold Morrison, Robert Sterling's golf partner and longtime family friend. The whole thing was rushed through an emergency session without proper review. The corruption ran deeper than any of us had imagined. They hadn't just stolen my money and forged documents. They had infiltrated the legal system itself, using their connections and influence to manipulate the courts. But the worst betrayal was yet to come. That evening, Agent Chen called with news that made my world completely collapse. "I'm sorry, Serafina. I've been ordered to close the investigation and turn over all evidence to the local district attorney's office." "What? Why?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Marcus Sterling filed a complaint with my supervisors claiming that I had exceeded my authority and was pursuing a personal vendetta based on fabricated evidence. He provided documentation showing that the FBI had no jurisdiction in what he characterized as a family dispute over inheritance. But the financial crimes, the fraud network, all the evidence we gathered, has been ruled inadmissible because it was obtained as part of an unauthorized investigation. I'm being transferred to another case and you're on your own." The phone slipped from my numb fingers as the full scope of their power became clear. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They owned the system itself. Judges, lawyers, federal agents. Everyone could be bought, threatened, or manipulated. The final blow came Friday morning when David called with devastating news. "Serafina, I'm so sorry. They got to Patricia. What do you mean? She's changed her story. She called this morning and said she made everything up to get revenge on Robert for firing her. She's prepared to testify that all the documents she gave us were fabricated and that you paid her to lie about the financial records. I felt like I was drowning. But she had proof. She showed us the real records. She turned over different records to the authorities yesterday. Clean books that show no irregularities. She claims the ones she gave us were forgeries that you helped her create. Patricia had betrayed us completely. Whether she had been bought off, threatened, or had been working for them all along, she had systematically destroyed our case from the inside. Every piece of evidence she had provided was now tainted. Every testimony she had given was worthless. They're not just criminals, David said, his voice hollow with defeat. They're criminal masterminds. They've spent 20 years building a network of corruption that makes them virtually untouchable. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the dinner invitation that now felt like a death warrant. Tomorrow evening, I would walk into their house completely defenseless. No FBI backup, no legal representation, no evidence that couldn't be dismissed as fabrication. They had systematically destroyed everything I had built, turned every ally against me, and corrupted every institution that should have protected me. For the first time since discovering the truth about my inheritance, I felt the crushing weight of despair. How do you fight people who own the system? How do you seek justice when the judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials are all in their pocket? But as I sat there in the darkness surrounded by the ruins of my shattered plans, something began to burn in my chest. It wasn't hope. Hope was too fragile for what they had done to me. It was pure, refined fury. They thought they had won. They thought their money and connections and corruption made them invincible. They thought little Serafina would crawl back into her hole and accept her place as their victim forever. They were wrong. If the system wouldn't give me justice, I would create my own. If their corruption made them untouchable through legal means, I would find another way. They had taught me a valuable lesson about power and ruthlessness, and I was about to become their most dedicated student. The dinner was still on. But this time, I wasn't coming to seek justice through the courts or the law. I was coming to deliver a very different kind of reckoning, one that their money and connections couldn't protect them from. The game had changed completely. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Saturday morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. The voice was unfamiliar, but carried an authority that immediately commanded attention. Miss Mitchell, this is Sarah Davidson from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. We need to meet. My heart hammered as I agreed to meet her at a downtown coffee shop. Agent Davidson was a tall, severe woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a briefcase that she set carefully on the table between us. Miss Mitchell, I'm going to be very direct with you. The FBI may have been ordered to back off, but the IRS operates under different authority. Tax evasion is a federal crime that we investigate independently, and your stepfamily has made some very serious mistakes. She opened her briefcase and spread out documents that made my breath catch. Bank records, investment statements, property transfers, evidence of financial activity spanning 20 years. We've been investigating Robert Sterling's construction company for 3 years as part of a broader tax evasion scheme. When Agent Chen's investigation was shut down, her evidence was transferred to us. What we found was fascinating. Agent Davidson pointed to a series of transactions highlighted in yellow. Your stepfamily has been reporting significantly lower income than their lifestyle would suggest. Robert's company shows modest profits on tax returns, but somehow they've purchased properties worth millions, sent Marcus to expensive private schools, and maintained a lifestyle that should be impossible on their reported income. But how does this help me? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Because we've traced the source of their unreported income directly to your father's trust account. Every major purchase, every luxury expenditure, every business expansion can be tied back to money that should have legally belonged to you. That makes their tax evasion also a case of criminal theft. She pulled out another set of documents. But here's what makes this truly beautiful from an enforcement perspective. Unlike local courts that can be influenced by personal connections, federal tax law doesn't care about golf partnerships or family friendships. When we prosecute tax crimes, we seize all assets purchased with unreported income. Everything they own, the house, the cars, the business, the investments, becomes property of the federal government. My hands were shaking as the implications sank in. You mean? I mean, we're going to take everything. And because the original theft of your inheritance was the source of their unreported income, you'll be entitled to full restitution as the victim of the underlying crime. But Agent Davidson wasn't finished. There's more. We've been working with a federal prosecutor named James Harrison, who specializes in complex financial crimes. He's been building a RICO case against the professional network that your stepfamily belongs to. The lawyers, accountants, and contractors who help wealthy criminals hide assets and evade taxes. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The same law used to prosecute organized crime families. The irony was perfect. Judge Morrison, who signed that restraining order against you, he's been taking bribes from this network for years, influencing court decisions in exchange for expensive gifts and investment opportunities. We have him on surveillance recordings discussing how to manipulate legal proceedings. My mind raced as I processed this information. So the restraining order is worthless. Morrison is about to be arrested himself, and every ruling he's made while taking bribes will be reviewed and potentially overturned. Your case will be reassigned to a federal court where corruption carries much steeper penalties. Agent Davidson leaned forward, her eyes intense. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow night, you're going to that dinner just as planned. But instead of trying to confront them alone, you're going to wear a wire and let them incriminate themselves on federal recordings. We need them to admit to the tax evasion, the money laundering, and the bribery. Can you do that? For the first time in days, I felt the stirring of genuine hope. Yes, but what about Patricia? She betrayed us once already. Patricia Morgan is currently in federal protective custody, Agent Davidson said with a slight smile. The woman who called your uncle and recanted her testimony was an imposter. Someone Marcus hired to pose as Patricia and discredit your case. The real Patricia has been helping us build an airtight case from the inside. My relief was overwhelming. Patricia hadn't betrayed us after all. She had been silenced and replaced, but she was safe and still on our side. We've been watching your stepfamily for months, Agent Davidson continued. Every time they thought they were destroying evidence or silencing witnesses, they were actually walking deeper into our trap. Their arrogance made them careless, and their corruption made them vulnerable. She pulled out one final document. A federal seizure warrant with my stepfamily's address clearly printed at the top. This becomes active the moment we have sufficient recorded evidence of their crimes. They'll lose everything they own, face decades in federal prison, and you'll recover not just your original inheritance, but everything they built with your stolen money. As we prepared for the final confrontation, Agent Davidson explained the sophisticated recording equipment I would wear and the signals I would use to communicate with the federal agents positioned around the property. Unlike the FBI surveillance that had been compromised, this operation was being run at a level where corruption couldn't reach. "Remember," she said as we concluded our meeting, "your stepfamily thinks they've won. They believe their money and connections make them untouchable. That arrogance is going to be their downfall. Let them talk, let them brag, and let them confess to crimes they think nobody can prosecute." That evening, I received one more unexpected call. It was Uncle David, and his voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since this ordeal began. "Serafina, I just got off the phone with Agent Davidson. There's something else you need to know about tomorrow night's dinner." "What now?" "Your stepfamily has invited some very interesting guests. Judge Morrison will be there along with several other members of their criminal network. They're planning to celebrate what they think is their complete victory over you. But they're actually going to incriminate themselves and their co-conspirators all at once." The beautiful irony of it all hit me like a lightning bolt. They had invited me to dinner to humiliate me one final time, not knowing that they were actually arranging their own arrest party. Their greed and arrogance had led them to gather all the evidence and witnesses federal prosecutors needed in one convenient location. "It's perfect," David continued. "They're so convinced of their own invincibility that they're going to confess to decades of crimes in front of a room full of co-conspirators, all while being recorded by federal agents." As I prepared for sleep that night, I felt a calm confidence settle over me. The scared, desperate woman who had fled their dinner party 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place was someone who understood exactly how power really worked and how justice could be served outside the corrupt systems they had manipulated for so long. Tomorrow night, I would return to their mansion one final time. But this time, I wouldn't be walking into their trap. They would be walking into mine. And when the evening was over, the little failure they had mocked and dismissed would be the last person standing while their perfect world crumbled around them. The real reckoning was about to begin. Sunday evening arrived with crystalline clarity. I dressed carefully in the same thrift store dress I had worn 2 weeks earlier. A deliberate choice that would remind them of their cruelty, while hiding the sophisticated recording equipment Agent Davidson had helped me conceal. As I walked up their familiar driveway, federal agents in unmarked vehicles watched from strategically positioned locations throughout the neighborhood. The scene that greeted me was exactly what Agent Davidson had predicted. The dining room glittered with their most expensive china and crystal, but the real treasure was the guest list. Judge Morrison sat at the head of the table with Robert discussing upcoming court cases with casual corruption. Marcus was holding court with 2 other lawyers from their criminal network, bragging about recent legal victories that I now understood were actually successful evidence tampering. Vivian rushed to greet me with theatrical enthusiasm that barely concealed her malicious satisfaction. "Darling, I'm so glad you could make it. We have such wonderful news to share." "Oh," I said, taking my assigned seat at the far end of the table like the afterthought they considered me to be. "Well," Robert announced, raising his wine glass with obvious glee. "It seems our little legal complications have been resolved. All those silly accusations have been dismissed, and we can finally put this unpleasant business behind us." Judge Morrison nodded sagely clearly, enjoying his role in their victory. These frivolous inheritance claims can be so disruptive to family harmony. Unfortunately, the legal system has ways of dealing with fabricated evidence and unstable accusers. The wire hidden in my jewelry picked up every word as they systematically confessed to crimes they thought were untouchable. Marcus boasted about paying Patricia's imposter to recant testimony. Robert detailed how they had used my inheritance money to fund construction projects that violated safety regulations. Vivian laughingly described forging my signature as a child, treating it as a clever prank rather than a federal crime. The beautiful thing about having friends in the legal system, Judge Morrison declared, clearly drunk on both wine and power, is that justice becomes quite flexible when properly motivated. Speaking of motivation, one of Marcus's lawyer friends interjected, "How much has this particular arrangement cost over the years?" Robert pulled out his phone and began reading from what I assumed were financial records. Let's see. Judge Morrison has received approximately $400,000 in consulting fees and gifts over the past decade. The district attorney's office gets about $50,000 annually in campaign contributions. Various clerks and court officials receive smaller amounts, but it all adds up. They were literally itemizing their bribery expenses while being recorded by federal agents. Their arrogance had made them completely reckless. The coup de grace came when Vivian, emboldened by wine and what she thought was total victory, decided to twist the knife one final time. "You know Serafina," she said with poisonous sweetness. "Your father would be so ashamed of how you turned out. Thank goodness we were here to ensure his hard-earned money went to people who could use it properly." My father's hard-earned money, I repeated, allowing genuine curiosity to color my voice. "Oh yes," Robert laughed. "That insurance settlement and lawsuit payout. $2.3 million that would have been completely wasted on someone like you. We've turned it into a real fortune through smart investments and business connections." "Investments like what?" Marcus eagerly jumped in, desperate to impress their guests with his family's criminal cleverness. "Well, we used about $500,000 to capitalize Dad's construction company, then another $1 million to purchase properties that we flipped using insider information from planning committees. The rest went into offshore accounts to avoid taxes." Judge Morrison raised his glass in a toast to creative financial planning and the kind of justice money can buy. As they clinked glasses in celebration of their crimes, I gave the prearranged signal by adjusting my bracelet. Within seconds, the front door exploded inward as federal agents flooded the house with weapons drawn. "Federal agents, nobody move." The crystal wine glasses shattered as they hit the marble floor, but the sound was nothing compared to the chaos that erupted as America's most corrupt dinner party became a federal crime scene. Agent Davidson strode into the dining room with a team of investigators, her severe expression unchanged as she surveyed the room full of criminals. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're all under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, tax evasion, bribery, and numerous other federal crimes. Everything you just said has been recorded and will be used as evidence in your prosecution." The look of shock and betrayal on Vivian's face as she realized I had orchestrated their downfall was worth 20 years of humiliation. Marcus tried to run and was tackled by 2 agents in the hallway. Judge Morrison attempted to assert judicial immunity before being informed that federal crimes trump local corruption. Robert, ever the pragmatist, immediately tried to cut a deal. Wait, I can give you information about bigger fish. More important people." Agent Davidson's smile was razor sharp. "Mr. Sterling, you've just confessed to decades of federal crimes while attempting to bribe law enforcement officers. You have nothing we need and everything to lose." As they led my family away in handcuffs, Agent Davidson turned to me with something approaching respect. "Outstanding work, Miss Mitchell. Their confessions tonight will ensure they spend the next 20 to 30 years in federal prison." The asset seizure began immediately. By morning, federal marshals had placed holds on their house cars, business accounts, and investments. The construction company was shut down pending investigation, and Marcus's law license was suspended. Within 72 hours, everything they had built with my stolen inheritance was in federal custody. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later when I received a call from the federal prosecutor's office. James Harrison, the prosecutor. Agent Davidson had mentioned had reviewed their recorded confessions and reached a plea agreement with Patricia Morgan. "Miss Mitchell, I have excellent news. Patricia's testimony combined with the recordings from Sunday night has given us enough evidence to prosecute everyone in their network. We're looking at 47 indictments, including judges, lawyers, contractors, and business owners. This is going to be the largest corruption case in the state's history. The financial recovery exceeded even our most optimistic projections. When all assets purchased with my inheritance were seized and liquidated, the total value was $9.2 million. After legal fees and restitution to other victims, I received $7.8 million. More than 3 times my original inheritance grown through 20 years of their criminal activity. But money, I discovered, was only part of the justice I had been seeking. The real transformation came through the family I built in the aftermath. Uncle David relocated across the country to be near me, and together we established the James Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud and family theft. Patricia Morgan, after serving as the star witness in dozens of prosecutions, became our first full-time investigator. Agent Davidson, who retired from the IRS 6 months later, joined our board of directors. Margaret Thornton, finally free to practice law without corruption. Interference became our legal counsel. Together, we created a chosen family bound not by blood or marriage, but by shared values of truth, justice, and protecting the vulnerable from predators. The Foundation's first major success came when we helped Martha Hensley, the widow whose husband had died due to Robert's safety violations, recover $800,000 in compensation from the seized assets. Jennifer Liu, the business owner who had been defrauded by their construction company, received full restitution plus damages. Dozens of other victims found justice through our work. 18 months after that final dinner, I stood in the courtroom as Judge Sarah Martinez, who had replaced the disgraced Judge Morrison, sentenced my stepfamily to their prison terms. Vivian received 25 years for fraud, forgery, and racketeering. Robert got 30 years for tax evasion, bribery, and criminal negligence, resulting in workplace deaths. Marcus, whose law degree had enabled much of their criminal activity, received the harshest sentence of 35 years. As the bailiffs led them away, Vivian turned to look at me one final time. The cruel arrogance was gone, replaced by something I had never seen in her eyes before: genuine fear. She finally understood that the little failure she had mocked and dismissed had become the architect of her complete destruction. But I felt no satisfaction in her fear, no joy in their suffering. What I felt was peace. The deep, lasting peace that comes from knowing that justice had been served and that future victims would be protected. Standing outside the courthouse with my chosen family around me, I thought about my father and what he would have thought of this journey. I had not just recovered his gift to me. I had honored his memory by using that gift to protect others from the kind of predators who had stolen from us both. The scared young woman who had fled their dinner table in humiliation was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that true family isn't defined by shared blood, but by shared commitment to protecting and supporting each other. Someone who knew that real justice sometimes requires patient strategy and the courage to take on systems that seem impossibly corrupt. Someone who had learned that the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's becoming the kind of person who ensures that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. As we walked away from the courthouse together, Uncle David put his arm around my shoulders and asked the question I had been hoping someone would ask. "So, what's next?" I smiled, thinking of all the victims still waiting for justice, all the predators still hiding behind money and connections, all the families that could be saved from the kind of betrayal mine had endured. Next, we keep fighting. We keep exposing corruption, protecting victims, and proving that no one is above justice, no matter how much money they have or how many officials they think they own. The war against family financial fraud was far from over. But now I had an army resources, and most importantly, the knowledge that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary justice when they refuse to accept that corruption wins. You know what's incredible about this journey? I never expected that standing up to family betrayal would teach me so much about what real family actually means. Have you ever had to choose between blood relatives and chosen family when the people who were supposed to protect you became the ones you needed protection from? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe in karma? Or do you think justice only comes to those who fight for it? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to win against corruption, no matter how impossible it might seem. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from victim to victor. Remember, you're stronger than you know. Justice is possible even in the darkest situations, and sometimes the family you choose is more powerful than the family you're born into. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right. You never know whose life you might save by refusing to stay silent.